Hi everyone, my name is Claire Ledevick, and today I'll be talking about how race is shown in two different TV shows, in Abbott Elementary and Reservation Dogs, both of them which I am looking at season 1, episode 1 of both shows, and just how these shows come from totally different backgrounds. Abbott focuses on Black teachers in Philadelphia, and Reservation Dogs focuses on Indigenous teens in Oklahoma. I'm going to connect both these shows to ideas from our lecture that we learned, like white savior moments, representation, and people using language that isn't theirs to use. I'll also connect it to the documentary White Like Me, which talks about white privilege and how racism shows up in our everyday life. So, in Abbott Elementary, race is shown through the real experiences of Black teachers working in a school that doesn't get enough funding. And it's cool because the show doesn't use stereotypes. It shows how these teachers actually deal with problems that come from the bigger systems, not from their own failures, not because of anything that they did, but because of the systemic racism, systemic issues. And a big example is how the school barely has resources, but the teachers, which are mostly Black, are expected to make it all just work anyways. And this really connects to the documentary White Like Me. Tim Wise explains that white privilege lets white people ignore racial problems because it usually doesn't impact them personally, so they're never going to do anything about it. And this show also calls out the white savior behavior through Jacob, which I have here on the slide. He's the white teacher who tries really hard to be kind of woke, but ends up making things about himself, which in the lecture we learned about how certain words like woke come from Black communities. When people who aren't Black start using these words without understanding the history behind them, it waters down the meaning. Overall, Abbott shows Black teachers as the leaders and the people who keep the school going, and it shows that the main problem isn't them, it's actually the system that they're working in. In Reservation Dogs, the race is shown in a completely different way. Everything is told from an Indigenous point of view. Even the writers, the actors, and the directors are all Indigenous, so the show feels really authentic, and not just based on stereotypes from like an outsider's perspective of what they think Indigenous people are really like, which is really cool. And instead of showing Native people as kind of sad or mystical or kind of frozen in the past, like Hollywood usually does, the show gives us this look into the lives of these real teens who are funny, and they're hurt, they're grieving, they're growing, and they're just trying to figure out their lives. And I really think that this connects back to the documentary White Like Me, which talks about how media usually puts white people at the center, but Reservation Dogs is different. It flips that and actually does the complete opposite by letting Indigenous kids be the center of the show and tell their own stories. And the show also avoids people misusing Indigenous culture like mascots or the phrase spirit animal, and instead it uses real humor, real slang, and real cultural moments that come from the community itself. Whereas Abbott focuses on calling out unfair systems, Reservation Dogs focuses on showing that what everyday life looks like inside of an Indigenous community, from their own personal viewpoint. So now I want to compare the two. When we compare the two shows, we can really see how each one handles race differently. So Abbott Elementary uses humor and the school setting, their workplace, to show what systemic racism looks like underfunded schools and white savior behavior. Whereas Reservation Dogs uses a mix of comedy and drama to show Indigenous culture, family, and identity. And it shows what it looks like to exist in that community, how to how they operate, not through an assumption of an outsider's eyes. It's like you're looking at it from within, which is really cool. And I think that both shows push back on stereotypes. They let their characters be full, real, authentic people, not just one-dimensional, or being in line with the typical Hollywood stereotypes. And I think that both connect back to the ideas from the documentary White Like Me, especially the idea of who gets centered and who has privilege, but they handle it in different ways. I think that Abbott does it by calling out the system, and Reservation Dogs does it by telling their own stories in an honest way, which is really cool. So in conclusion, Abbott Elementary and Reservation Dogs show two very different but powerful ways of talking about race on TV, which is really cool. I think that Abbott shows what it's like for Black teachers to work inside of a broken system, and Reservation Dogs shows Indigenous teens taking back their stories and showing a true representation of their culture. And I think that both shows do a really great job of challenging stereotypes and avoiding misusing their culture or misrepresenting culture. And I think that it reminds us of why real representation matters. And these are my references. So yeah, thank you for watching.